Hello, everyone. My name is Bracha Oriana Fishman. I am a registered nurse hypnotherapist here in Brooklyn, and I am here to share with you today some things that throughout this COVID-19 pandemic I've come to see both as a professional and in my own personal life. And I'd like to share these things with you in order to help you foster some healthy informed, wise decision making moving forward. Because the truth is, epidemiologists have been telling us for ages, pandemics are a thing of our reality. So are the various microbes that are becoming resistant to antibiotics, the viruses that are mutating and that are not responding to the same vaccines. So these are realities of our life. And I believe that in seeing our response, I've been able to see some areas where we can just make minor tweaks and changes to our approach, and it can just snowball into really wonderful effects that can promote health for ourselves and our families and our communities. So I'd like to start with some background. I am a registered nurse hypnotherapist. I've been working in the Brooklyn community for about 7 years now with geriatric patients mostly, and then also young adults and adults in mental health counseling in the form of hypnotherapy. And so, especially throughout this pandemic, I've been able to interact with people who have fallen ill. Some have lost their lives. This has been challenging. Some saw family members that have passed, and so just been able to see it from a wide perspective. And so I would really like to share things with you that I've learned with the intention that you can benefit from them, and that moving forward, I think we can all respond in a more productive way, because maybe our current response may not be as productive and as beneficial. And I have no intention um, to defy our political authority figures, whether Republican or Democrat. I support the decisions they make, and I wholeheartedly believe they're doing so with our best intentions at heart. It's just sometimes even they, when they admit, for example, Governor Cuomo may admit that he doesn't completely recognize droplet precautions and things like that. It's understandable that the decision-making process from that perspective may be limited or skewed. And so I think it's healthy to question. I think it's healthy to observe our reality and to make necessary changes. And so what this spawned for me, this particular epidemic as a nurse, is to go back to my studies and to how I've been trained, as well as my fellow nurses and also doctors to some extent, who are definitely more trained and more versed, and yet we share some common knowledge. And so I was looking to compare where we are now with this COVID-19 versus where we've been historically, and with all of the various microbes that we've been living with, because this was considered to be novel. And so the response was so outrageous, and motivated by the fact that we did not know anything like this before. And in truth, we really have, when you look at the statistics and the data and the facts about this, it's not novel, and very highly contagious and infectious diseases are common knowledge to most healthcare professionals. So let's just start by the very basic research that I did. This is by no means a very scholastic research. Just some of the major key points that stick out that really let me know that the COVID-19 is in fact very challenging. It is very serious, and we must treat it as such. It is just not novel. And the response that we've taken may actually impede our ability to physically and physiologically respond in a healthy way. So in this part one series, I'm going to go over the basics of how COVID compares in the broader scheme of things, and then just touch on how I've seen a response and what the response has been. And then in part two, I'd like to share with you what I believe, really looking at it from a broader view, what I believe we can do. And again, this is by no means an intention to have an effect politically. It's just that if we should find ourselves in this situation again, how do we approach the restrictions and the limitations placed upon us? And how do we maybe find ways to tweak them in order to really benefit as much as possible? And so starting with my first concern, which as you can see here is the way that any microbe is gauged, the strength of it is based on its virility, is how long does it survive outside of a host body? And that determines one of its strengths. And so quickly, just to touch on, when you compare COVID to some of its, sister viruses or some bacterias, it is not anything out of the ordinary that hasn't yet been discovered in the healthcare field as yet. So COVID survives on most plastic and metal surfaces approximately 3 days. You can read the rest of the information here. For glass, it's a little bit longer, as it's not a porous surface, and that's the understanding. The flu is about 48 hours. These next to bacterial infections, although they're bacteria, are very highly infectious, very contagious, and they are a very big concern in the healthcare setting. Because they might be acquired there, and they are resistant to, they've grown resistant to antibiotics, and they are vancomycin-resistant enterococci and methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Both of them, as you can see, are staggeringly strong, 5 to 7 days on most hard surfaces. MRSA up to 7 months, many months on that, on various other surfaces, and sometimes in very rare cases with no symptoms indefinitely. Tuberculosis, also a very common, not common in the sense of in the number of infections, but common in the fact that it is highly viral. It spreads, survives up to 6 months, and spreads in dust particles. So it's very sensitive to light, which is a good thing. It helps us to know how we can respond to it, how to maintain our own health. And the second factor that that I was looking at is the mode of transmission. So how far can it travel, and by what means does it cause an infection? And so we can see here that COVID-19 and the flu, they do share the droplet precautions, and they travel up to 6 feet. I believe that the flu might be a little bit farther reaching though. And what this basically means, droplet precautions, is that living within the mucus secretions of sneezes and coughs is the virus, and it is spread in that way. Most commonly and most infectious would be through the actual droplet, and then it does live on surfaces and can be transmitted from person to person and person to surface contact. Yet when it lives on a surface, it gradually dies out, and so the severity of the response the body mounts will be decreasingly strong. Moving on, VRE, contact precautions, direct or indirect contact with an infected person or a surface that it lives on. MRSA, contact precautions, same, very, very highly contagious. They require hospitalization in many cases. And tuberculosis, airborne precautions, far more acute than our COVID-19, requires negative air pressure, which basically just means that the air must be removed from the room in order to prevent spreading infection. Isolation rooms, airborne infection isolation rooms, and up to 12 feet of traveling distance. So looking at that, didn't see any novelty there, and we have been trained as nurses, and I believe, I'm sure, as doctors, to recognize that there are very highly, highly contagious, very serious diseases. And sometimes as healthcare professionals, we're walking into a scene where we don't know what we may encounter. And yet what we've been trained to do helps to keep us safe. So we'll go into that, what that is, because isolation and quarantining is not something that the healthcare profession does on a routine basis, and definitely not stay-at-home orders. It's not very common. So the next thing is we're going to look at statistics and mortality rates, and again, these are not very precise because research shows that we don't always account for all of those who are infected. Those with mild to no symptoms aren't even counted because they don't make it to the hospital setting, and they may not even recognize their infection. So, and just going through the numbers for the sake of understanding, COVID-19, very serious, very devastating effects, obviously. Many people have lost their lives in the US and globally, 85,000 in deaths in the US as of May 14th by Johns Hopkins University, approximately 0.06%, which they believe would actually be a little bit less if we accounted for everyone that's infected. And the same applies for the global numbers. They would probably, the mortality rate would be lower if we accounted for all those who may have been infected. Influenza, again, is higher in a death rate. The seasonal flu, according to US CDC, is approximately 0.1% in the US. And so the flu also has its share of an effect on us, and yet we did not respond in the way that we did to this. Now, again, it's not in criticism, and it's not in looking down, because I do believe that our officials, political and healthcare, are doing the best that they can with the knowledge that they have. It's just that we as consumers, informed and able to get all this information, can make really wise choices moving forward. And as you can see here, we've suffered serious flu pandemics that have also taken many lives before. So again, these are not uncommon to us. So what did we do? Well, how did we respond? We issued, the World Health Organization issued a state of emergency, and it then began to place everyone in quarantine and isolation, economic shutdown. As you can see here, this is Governor Cuomo's order for wearing face masks in public when you are not maintaining social distancing. So on public transit, busy streets, supermarkets, and so on. And with that order and the economic shutdown and everything else that we had that was impacting us at that time, we started to see that, people were wearing face masks if they were walking down a street alone, if they were jogging in a setting where there were no other people around them within 6 feet. What else did I start to see? Well, I started to note people putting face masks on their children. Even when they would be playing in small groups, maybe just by themselves with their parents. I started seeing and hearing of patients and family members saying that they haven't opened their windows in months, refusing to air out because they believe there is a threat in the air. I've also seen elderly patients who have not been able to see with their family members. They've been coming and knocking at the door and standing, some 12 feet, 16 feet away. I've heard and seen people who've had some very awful experiences in hospitals and not being able to see their family members. And so many heart-wrenching experiences that I believe could have been tweaked also to comply with the orders, but also to ensure that we maintain a healthy immune system and that we are prepared for these coming epidemics, because it's true, these microbes aren't new. They outnumber us, and they're here to stay. Some of them are smart and are developing immunity to our antibiotics. And so I'd like to, in part two, go ahead and share with you some of my suggestions as to the best ways to move forward and to live a bright and healthy future in the midst of pandemics.